Let's get some analysis now of the recent peace talks that have continued in Switzerland over the last little while. I want to bring in the ANU's visiting fellow of European Studies, Associate Professor Matthew Sussex, an expert in Russian and Ukrainian affairs. Matthew, let's start with the peace talks. Is there any chance of a peace deal? Is Putin just, playing the Americans and the Ukrainians along here?
Look, Kieran, you'd have to be fairly sceptical, I think, that we're that much closer to a peace deal. A lot of the recent talks between the United States and the Ukrainians have focused on reconstruction rather than actually getting to an agreement. Whereas there has been some progress when the Russians and the Ukrainians have sat down, it's really been over things that are secondary to the main issue of how much territory Ukraine has to give up. And in that context, the Russians have basically held firm and said, we're not going to compromise. The United States has been suggesting to the Ukrainians that they should take the Russian deal. In fact, about a day ago, the United States abstained from a UN resolution supporting Ukrainian territorial integrity, which is quite surprising and a mark of just how far it's got. I think the Russian perspective is, drag this out as long as possible, safe in the knowledge that the United States really doesn't want to annoy Russia very much.
Which is interesting because they can do it in that sense. Surely there's fatigue among the population when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of Russians that have been killed. A massive amount.
Oh, look, that's absolutely right. And there are some storm clouds on the horizon, I think, for Putin. In fact, three of them. One is the economy, which is now basically baked into chronic decline and stagflation. No one's spending any money. The second one is recruitment. For the first time now, the Ukrainians are basically sending home, wounded or dead, more Russians than can be replaced. Moscow has tried to appeal to people's patriotism and go and sign up. It's tried to appeal to their hip pockets by saying, here's 3 million rubles, which is about $56,000 as a sign-on bonus. And that doesn't seem to be working. So Putin's recourse may well be a sort of more broad, conscription, mobilization. And the third thing I think that's a bit of a worry for Putin is that the ability of the United States to influence Ukraine is declining. And that's mainly because the United States doesn't provide any aid whatsoever to Ukraine anymore. And that slack is being picked up by the Europeans. So the United States' ability to bargain and to issue threats sometimes to the Ukrainians is perhaps less significant as it was when Trump first took office.
Yeah, so that's a really good point in the sense that the US authority diminished, first of all, by votes like that one you alluded to earlier, diplomatic votes on Ukrainian territory and the shifting tides on that front, but also in terms of the bottom line, that the aid, the military aid that flowed at one point very willingly out of the United States has ceased, and any support that is coming is paid for by largely Europe and Germany.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, now, if Trump wanted to force the issue, he could probably, suggest to the Europeans that they can't buy American hardware anymore. But that would fly in the face of what his administration has recently said, which is, we insist the Europeans buy more American hardware and they shouldn't buy their own. The argument, therefore, gets kind of hard to make. And also, it would put substantial incentive on the Europeans to basically counterpunch against the United States if it said, well, you can't buy weapons for Ukraine anymore, through various economic levers that it can pull simply because it holds an awful lot of US currency.
So finally, Matthew, is there a chance that Ukraine can still win this war, given those storm clouds you referred to earlier over Putin, whether it be the recruitment crisis, the economic dramas? Can they still win it? Is there a glimmer of hope for Kyiv that their resilience will be rewarded?
Yeah, look, Kieran, it's funny how this conflict sort of swings back and forth and back and forth. It does look, at least on one very important part of the front, that Ukraine is succeeding. In fact, they've pushed the Russians out of about 400 square kilometers of territory. That's actually not a huge amount, but it's really significant given the momentum from the Russian army has been inexorably moving forward. So no, it's not impossible, but for that to come about, essentially the Ukrainians would have to remain in the fight for at least 2-3 years, and certainly Putin will do everything he can to try and reverse the fates of the Ukrainians.
True, yep. Visiting a fellow at the ANU Centre for European Studies, Associate Professor Matthew Sussex. Great to chat as always. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran.